everybody, and welcome to our Give to Get Mindset Mastery session today. And today we're going to be talking about motivation, one of my most, I'll say, interesting, favorite, and fascinating subjects to talk about. Love to talk about what I'll say motivation with anybody and everybody that will have a conversation with me. Why? Because, first of all, a motive. A lot of people think a motive is a reason, think about logic, but the actual definition of a motive is an emotional impulse that causes one to act. And so ultimately, we are motivated by our, what I'll say, emotional, responses that cause us to take action in our life. To that point, I've always said, if you understand the motive, you understand the individual. The more that you understand an individual's motive in a particular situation, the more that you understand the individual, the more that you can have insight or gain insight into the individual in terms of why are they possibly choosing a particular action, behavior, or attitude, or course of action from that point of view, which can give you greater insight into how to interact with the individual as well too. The other thing about motive is, or motivation, I'll say, and that's really where I want to go with our topic today, is if you can think about it in terms of your mindset and what it is you want to accomplish and everything that you bring to bear. That's to quote Doug McGirt, who's also a coach on the Give to Get and helps you boomers as well too. He talks about building a supercar. So if all of your abilities, all your talents are the supercar that can help you go do things, can help you go accomplish things in your life, motivation is the fuel that you put into the supercar. And Doug says many, many times, you wouldn't put crappy fuel into your supercar from that point of view. I go one step farther and say it's the rocket fuel that you put into, quote unquote, your rocket that propels you where you want to go. Because without motivation, all the ability in the world, all the talent in the world is not going to fuel you to take action to go do that. When you start to understand where your motive comes from, what motivates you, that's the fuel that goes into the supercar and rockets you forward towards the things you want to do. So we're going to talk about that today, and I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to bring it up. Hang on, let's cancel that. Go back here, click on that. There we go. And so there you're going to see my screen. And let's go over here to the slideshow. Click on that and we'll start here. So motivation, okay. In any one individual's, what I'll say, individual motivation in a particular moment, there's always what I'll say, two factors out of a possible four factors that are coming together that creates the emotion. So let's talk about the first two. The first two is the difference between a push motivator and a pull motivator. That's two out of the four factors that what I'll say collide to create a motive. And so on the push motivation, that's what we call an avoidance. You are pushed to do something or pushed not to do something to avoid something on what we would call a negative consequence. Okay, so it's a fear of failure. You escape that. It's a fear of compliance. I was talking with Mauro the other day, and he used the word compliance. Sometimes we, quote unquote, comply, or we're motivated to comply to avoid something negative happening to us, based on rules, regulations, things of that nature that we're getting involved in. So a push motivator is very much an avoidance from that point of view, meaning we are motivated to do or not to do something to avoid a certain situation or a certain circumstance or a certain consequence. On the other side, we have what we call a pull motivator, which is an attraction or an approach to, meaning we're pulled to go do something because we're going to get something, or we're pulled not to do something because by not doing it, we're going to, quote unquote, get something. And so in one case, we're avoiding a negative consequence. In the other, we're what I'll say, getting a positive consequence. In the one, we're avoiding a negative situation. In the other, we're getting what I'll say, a positive situation or a positive response. Okay. And in the middle, you'll see that what I'll say, almost like a oblong type circle, or what I like to call the elastic that wraps around the comfort zone. And what I mean by that is, if I think of that, what I'll say, oblong circle around the comfort zone as an elastic band, if I push the two ends of the elastic band together, then let it go, it's going to go back to its original shape. It's going to go back to its comfort zone. If I pull an elastic band away from each other and let it go, it's going to go back to its comfort zone. Meaning the moment I do whatever I need to do to avoid the push motivator, my motivation goes back to the comfort zone and, quote unquote, I stop doing it. The moment I receive whatever is the pull motivator on the positive side, the moment I receive that, quote unquote, my motivation goes back to a stable state and I go back into my comfort zone. And so you really want to understand this from that point of view. Okay. And here's the value of really understanding this between quote unquote push motivator and a pull motivator. A push motivator, which again is on the negative side, okay, has 10 times the intensity of a pull motivator. I want to say that again. A push motivator has the intensity that is 10 times that of a pull motivator, meaning when we motivate, or we are motivated from a push point of view, from an avoidance point of view, because one, that's painful. And so we do things to escape pain. Okay, part of our mindset is to keep us comfortable in that comfort zone and avoiding pain. Okay, if I was to put my hand on a hot element, I would move it away very quickly, and that would motivate me to never do that again because of the pain. So the things that happen in our life that cause us pain, okay, and this is being done, what I'll say, on purpose, intentional, by design, from a motivational point of view. Okay, we've got a lot of push motivators, I'll say, at work from that point of view. If you don't do this, this is going to happen. If you do this, that's going to happen. If you do that, that's going to happen. Okay, we've got a lot of pull motivators too. If you go do this, you'll get this. If you go do this, you'll get this. If you don't do this, you'll get this from that point of view. If you keep your numbers below this, you'll get that. If you raise your numbers above this, you'll get that.
On a scale of 1 to 5, would you give yourself a 5 on achieving what you want in life? If your answer is anything less than a 5, right now, I have something awesome for you. Achieving your goals and living your life at a 5 isn't easy. Most people aren't prepared to focus, stay disciplined, and do the everyday work that is necessary to achieve amazing results. But since you're watching this, then I'm guessing that you're not one of those people. And this is an opportunity that will change your life. Give to Get is a global program that brings together world-class coaching and combines it with empowering masterminds and networking opportunities. We provide 5-star guidance for the price of a cup of coffee a day. To find out more, click on the link in the description of this coaching session.
And so where I'm going is, from an intensity point of view, okay, a push motivator is 10 times more intense than a pull motivator. So one, we want to understand that. Okay, here's the thing. If we use push motivation a lot, either with ourselves or with people that we are interacting with, it will wear out its welcome very, very quickly. And you'll either have to increase the confidence or the competency, or increase, what I'll say, the consequence is a better way of saying it. Okay, or you'll just burn the individual out, or burn the situation out, possibly might even burn you out if the push motivator is aimed at you, okay? On the pull motivator, it's not as intense as the push motivator, but it will never burn us out. And it will, quite frankly, always give us energy as we go forward. So when we talk about what is the ideal split between push and pull, I like to say, from a push motivation strategy. So you're going to develop a push motivation strategy for yourself. You're going to develop a motivational strategy again for yourself. You're going to develop a motivational strategy for your people. If you're a business owner, you're going to develop a motivational strategy for your children. If you're a parent, you're going to develop a motivational strategy for your friend if you're wanting to help them go somewhere. In that, what I'll say, motivational strategy, you want no more than 10% of the motivation coming from a push motivator. One, because it's very intense, it can burn us out. Two, because it's so intense, we don't have to do it that often to really get people into action, including ourselves. Okay. And therefore 90% on the pull. So as you're developing a motivational strategy, again, for yourself or for someone else, you ideally want to develop about 10% of that motivation coming from a push factor and 90% coming from a pull, meaning 10% from don't do this or this will happen, or do this or that will happen, and 90% from do this and you will get this. Okay. The other two factors, remember I said there's 4 factors and 2 always collide. The other 2 are external and internal. So you've got push motivator and pull motivator. Those are 2 factors. And you've got external and quote unquote internal. Those are the other 2 factors. So you can have an external push motivator. You can have an external pull motivator. You can have an internal push motivator, and you can have an internal pull motivator. Here's the other key to learn about those next 2 factors. If push and pull, i.e. those 2 motivation factors, if push and pull are external, motivation is short term. What we mean by that is if I'm going to be motivating somebody else, I'm going to be motivating one of you people that are watching this, and I put a quote unquote external push factor in, meaning if you do something or don't do something, you're going to get a consequence, which is a negative. Okay. The moment you avoid that, because that's what a push motivator is, well, your motivation stops because you've avoided the consequence. Okay. Likewise, if I put an external pull motivator in, meaning the moment you do this or the moment you don't do this, I'm going to give you this, which is a positive consequence. The moment you, again, take the appropriate action to do that or don't do that, you're going to get this positive. Motivation goes back to that comfort zone, as we had on this slide, and the motivation in that moment is over. And so that's really something for you to be aware of, especially, I'll say, people who quote unquote feel like they've got to motivate their people, business owners who feel like they've got to motivate their employees, okay, parents who feel like they've got to motivate their children, okay. It's, I like to say, not your job, not your responsibility to motivate your people. It really is your responsibility to facilitate their motivation and transition motivation from quote unquote external to internal. Because when motivation is internal, now we've got an internal push motivator and an internal pull motivator, motivation becomes future oriented. And motivation now, what I'll say, is always present. Why? Because it's coming inside out. It's coming from myself. Okay. If you remember, or I'll even just quote it from one of the presentations I did earlier, the number one competency in highly successful people is they are self-managed. It's the number one competency. We talk about it all the time. The number one competency of highly successful people is they're self-managed. The number one, what I'll say, aspect, the number one characteristic of highly successful people, I'll say it this way, the number one characteristic of highly successful self-managed individuals is that they're self-motivated. Okay, it's the number one. So while the number one competency of all successful people is they're self-managed, the number one characteristic of highly self-managed people is they are self-motivated, meaning their motivation comes from within. It's an internal motivation. And again, it's either a push or a pull. So when we go back to this slide, this is where we talk about a internal push motivation strategy, no more than 10% of the time. Internal pull motivation strategy, about 90% of the time. And here's why. Breaking loose is moving from being externally controlled, externally motivated, to being internally controlled and internally motivated. Okay. Success breeds success. The feelings of success and competency are never ending and constantly reinforcing. Okay. If I asked you the question, when are you most motivated? When are you most excited? When are you most, what I'll say, energized to go do something? It's probably when you're being successful. is probably when you're being successful. I'm going to use an analogy here just because for myself, I love to go hike mountains. Again, I'm not a mountain climber. I'm a mountain hiker. I love to hike mountains, love to get up to the summit of mountains. Okay. So for me, I'm internally motivated to quote unquote, go hike mountains. Okay. Both on a push and pull. We'll talk about that in a moment. Where I'm going with that is I feel most motivated when I reach the summit of a mountain that I choose to go and climb. Okay, so or hike, I should say, just so the language is clear. So when I go and hike up to the top of the mountain, I am most motivated when I get to the summit. I've reached my goal, which means, what do I want to do? I want to go do it again. And I want to go do it again. And I want to go do it again. And I want to do it for the rest of my life. Why? Because it's really motivating. It's, again, success is breeding success. So the feeling of being successful every time I summit a mountain, okay, and competency are never ending and constantly reinforcing. So every time I climb and hike it and get to the summit of a mountain, I feel successful. And I know I can get that. So meaning I know I can go do it again. I can go climb another mountain, hike another mountain. I can go hike a bigger mountain. I can go do a more difficult hike. I can do a longer hike. I can do a hike that has a greater elevation. I can do a hike that not only is longer and has a greater elevation and has a higher degree of difficulty than one I did before. This is all what happens when we talk about internal motivation and breaking loose from being externally controlled to being internally controlled. Okay. And even for myself, from that point of view, when I'm on a hike, we talk about push and pull. Okay. The middle of the hike is always the biggest challenge. Okay. The middle of whatever you're doing from a motivational point of view and from a degree of difficulty point of view is always the hardest. Okay. You're going to set a goal. You're going to set an objective. You want to go accomplish something. You start towards that. Usually motivation is pretty high. Usually it's a pull from that point of view. And from that point of view, your excitement's high, your energy's high. And today we're going to hike a mountain. Once you get into quote unquote, what I'll call the middle third of the mountain, now all of a sudden it becomes tough. Why? Because every time you look up, you see the trail. What's the trail? It's going up. It's hard walking up some of the difficult, what I'll say, mountains we have out here in Alberta. The other side of it is, what do you see? You see a little short path, and then it'll be a turn to the right or a turn to the left to some respects. And so you never know what's around that corner. So you've got to trudge up that next 100 meters, 150 meters, 200 meters, yards for the people in the US, and then go left or go right to see where the trail goes up again. And you've got another turn again. And it's like, man, when are we going to get to the top? When are we going? And usually when you're hiking a mountain, at least out here, okay, you do have some spots where you get to see the horizon. A lot of times you're in the tree line. And so the view is very condensed. You don't really have the open views. And where I'm going with this is that's the challenge. Okay. And so that's where you want to bring your, what I'll say, 90% quote unquote pull motivator. I want to get to the top. I want to get to the top. And that's the reward when you get to the top. Sometimes you might have to, what I'll say, give yourself what I'll call an internal push motivator. Okay. And for me, it may sound a little extreme to some people, but I sit there and go, you know what? I'm not going to have a glass of water. I'm not going to drink water. I'm not going to go into my water bottle until I climb another 500 meters. Once I climb another 500 meters, then quote unquote, I'll have the water. And so I avoid having water and holding myself accountable by pushing myself into that, what I'll say, negative spot to keep myself going. Because a lot of times, quite frankly, we want to quit at things. Okay. And nothing good comes from quitting. The only thing I say that comes from quitting is you learn how to quit. And if you do it over and over again, you become a master quitter. And so from that point of view, sometimes I'll hold myself accountable with that push motivator, which is that pain side of things, to get me onto the top. Most of the time, though, I'm rewarding myself. And then as you get to the top of the mountain, you start to see the summit. You know you're going to summit. You start to see the greater, what I'll say, view as you get above the tree lines from that point of view. That's when the quote unquote pull motivator really kicks in, and the last third is easy. So where I'm going with this is Not only do you want to develop your motivational strategy that has 10% on the push side and 90% on the pull side, you also want to start to develop your strategy as you're moving towards whatever it is. What's the motivation strategy for the first third of the journey you're going on? What's the motivational strategy for the second third of the journey you're going on, or I like to call it the middle third? And what's your quote unquote, what I'll say, motivational strategy for the last third? These are all the things that you want to start to develop and what I'll say, build a plan for. Why? Because as you get into the journey, you know what's going to motivate you. Remember what I said, motivation is the rocket fuel that goes in the supercar that powers the supercar across the finish line. And so as you develop your motivational strategy, get very specific about what these motives are, what your motivational strategy is, how you're going to motivate yourself. What are you going to do from a push point of view? What's the quote unquote negative that if you aren't successful, you're going to, what I'll say, do? What's the positive once you receive it? How are you going to reward yourself there too? Because again, success breeds success. The feeling of success and competency are never ending, constantly reinforcing. So from that point of view, let's start to talk about, just some self-assessment of our own, what I'll say, personal life, where we talk about where we've got here duties and responsibilities. Because we've all got duties and we've all got responsibilities in our life. Okay. Those are push motivators. Okay. They push us to go do something. Okay, you've got a duty to take care of your family. You've got a responsibility to take care of your family. You've got a responsibility to go earn an income. You've got a responsibility to get up every morning and go to the job that you have or run the business that you have. And that even might be running the business for the people. Okay, those are all push motivators, and they push us to go do that, because if we don't do that, there's negative consequences to that. Okay, and so you want to look at, where's your motivation coming from there? Again, that's a push. When we talk about, what's your life purpose? What's the meaning of your life? That's now getting onto the pull side. So as you start to, what I'll say, build your own motivational factor and strategy for yourself, what are those push motivations in our life? What are the responsibilities that we have to take care of, need to take care of, because we've made choices to do that? But then on the other side, what do we want to do with our life? What's the meaning of our life? What's the purpose of our life? What do we want to accomplish? What are the dreams and goals that we have in our life? And then, if we really ultimately want to get to the level of fulfillment, as we've got here on the slide, okay, what does the ideal dream life, what does the ideal, what I'll say, life plan look like for yourself from that point of view? As you start to build all of these, you can start to fuel all of them from a motivational factor, because it's going to be what I call your talents, your skills, all of those things, your effort and attitude, all of those things are going to help you go do that. That's what's going to help you accomplish it. It's going to be your motivation that's going to fuel it, though. So all of your effort and attitude, all your skills, all of your talents, all of your abilities, those are the things that build the supercar. The motivation is going to be what fuels it. So we start to, what I'll say, ask some questions. How do I feel about? How do I feel about the job I'm doing? How do I feel about my life? How do I feel about, the role as a father? How do I feel about, me being an employee? How do I feel about my relationships with my friends? How do I feel about whatever it is you want to add into that after the ... What would I like to accomplish? What would I like to accomplish in my career? What would I like to accomplish in my life? What would I like to accomplish as a father? What would I like to accomplish as a parent? What would I like to accomplish with my friends? What kind of relationships would I want to have with my children? What kind of relationships do I want to have in my life? What kind of life do I want to have? All of those are great questions to ask that way. And then what do you think you need to do in order to do that? As you start to have these conversations with yourself, what do you think you need to do in order to do that? Now we're starting to get into the planning stage, and we're starting to not only plan how to go do that, but now we're starting to plan, again, the motivational strategy as well too. Okay. Long time ago, one of my mentors used to say, plan your work and work your plan. This is exactly what we're doing here with the first three questions. How we feel about where we are right now. Let's take stock. Okay. What would I like to accomplish going forward? What do I think I need to do that? What's my plan to move forward? Okay. And then what will you do? This is a very powerful question, and it's been worded very specifically in terms of what you will do too. Because the moment you sit there and say in your mind, And I always like to say this out loud. When I coach people, I always like to say this out loud, because when you say in your mind, and if you say out loud to yourself, I will go do this, I will get up tomorrow morning and go work out, I will start to eat healthier, I will stop eating French fries, I will be more successful, I will earn $100,000 this year, I will go climb that mountain. The moment your mind hears will, it goes to a whole different level. So many of us sit there and go, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do that. Very few of us actually say, I will. And so again, where I'm coaching you here is, once you've done the first three and you've got your plan in place, will you go do that? I really want you to say, I will go do that. Because when you say, I will go do that, now it becomes a commitment in your mind, and the likelihood of you, what I'll say, getting it done and holding yourself accountable to it goes up tenfold. When you can hear something from me, you can hear something from somebody else, and your retention rate goes up. You can watch something on TV, you can read it in a book, and your retention rate does go up, okay? When you hear your own voice say something, your retention rate goes up by 40%. So when coaches and speakers and facilitators like myself, like Doug, like Jackie, like Armida, like Emma Lou, like Stefan, who are all the coaches here on Give to Get, when we're asking you to repeat things out loud, or when you go to personal development sessions and the speaker up on the stage asks you to repeat something, that's why they're asking you to do it. Okay, not that they like to hear your feedback. They really want you to say it out loud, because the retention rate for yourself goes higher. So when you're doing these things, again, if you're asking me from a coaching point of view and you're doing some reading and it's really important what you're reading, or it's really special or meaningful to you, I'm going to ask you to read it out loud. Why? Because it's going to help you retain it and reinforce it at a much higher level. Then you want to ask yourself, okay, what help do I need? Okay, how do I feel about, what do I want to accomplish? What do you think you need to do? What will you go do? What help do you think you'll need? Okay, because we all need help. None of us accomplish anything on our own. None of us accomplish anything on our own. So we always talk about, what help do you think you'll need? So start to identify the help that you'll need, and then where can you go get that help? And don't be afraid to ask for help. Okay, don't be afraid to ask for help. Highly successful people always want to help other people become successful. So if you're looking at these things and you're saying, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do that, what are the successful people that I can go approach and ask for help? Because the vast majority of the time, they will absolutely help you. Okay, and they'll probably help you without charging you for it in the beginning. Okay. All they ask for you, though, is to put the effort in. So if you're going to go ask somebody to be a mentor for you, if you're going to ask somebody to be a coach for you, if you're going to ask somebody to help you in a situation and they're giving you the help, the best thing you can do is to take that advice, take that help, and bring your best effort and attitude to it, and they will keep helping you. Okay. If you ask for their help and then you don't take their help, or you don't put the effort and attitude in, they're probably not likely going to help you again. Okay. And so where I'm going on this slide is then, as we go, again, I'll go back to my analogy. I'm going to go hike a particular mountain from that point of view. Where I am, okay, which is the bottom line, to where I want to get to, which is the top line, can be a very powerful motivator. We call that a gap. Okay, continuous increasing levels of expectation can really, in a sense, be very motivating. So each and every time that I go for a hike, okay, depending on the situation, I want to push myself to a higher level. I either want to do a longer hike, or I want to do a hike that has a higher elevation, or I want to do a hike that has a steeper elevation, or I want to do a hike that has a combination of all of those from that point of view. Or I'll pick some of my favorites that I've already done and I'll go, today I really want to go do this one. Why? Because it's going to stretch that gap from where I am, where I'm performing, which is the bottom line, to where I want to get to, which is the new line. This is where motivation comes in, okay? Because motivation, you can always do what I call one more. You can always go one step further. You can always pop off, one more push-up, one more set of lifting weights, one more chin up. You can always work out 1 minute longer. You can always work out 1 degree harder. You can always climb one mountain, what I'll say, higher. You can always be doing one more. And that's the motivation. And that's the fuel in the rocket car that gets you to levels. And when you do it once, now it's all of a sudden, it's like, okay, it's gone from a belief to a reality. Again, motivation fuels your belief that turns them into reality, meaning, again, go back to the analogy of hiking a mountain. If I've never hiked, quote unquote, a 10,000 foot mountain before, and I go hike it, now all of a sudden in my data bank, I can go, I've hiked a 10,000 foot mountain. I know I can do it because I did it. And so every time I go and attempt to hike another 10,000 foot mountain, I can do it. And now the next time that I want to go hike a 10,500 foot mountain, I need my motivation to get me those extra 500 meters. And away we go. Okay. I'll just, again, another quick analogy. I used to do a lot of rowing before in my life on the Concept 2 in the gym. And I had a goal of rowing 15,000 meters in an hour. And that was always where that gap, as I got down to those last, I'll say 10 minutes, and I got into that 4,500 meter, 14,000 meter range, and I had like 1,000 meters to go. Those last few minutes were always, give me 50 meters, give me 50 meters, give me 50 meters. And as I would do 50 meters, I'd almost feel like quitting, but it was like, give me another 50 before I quit. Give me another 50 before I quit. Give me another 50 before I quit. That's the fuel that's going into the rocket. That's the fuel, that's the rocket fuel that's going into the supercar to power you across the finish line. And eventually I reached that goal of doing the 15,000 meters in an hour. And it was a great goal because it took me a year to get there. It took me a year of, I'll say, failure, if you want to call it that, or attempts, because that's all failure is. It's an attempt. All failure is an attempt to do it again with more experience, with more real life experience that you can bring, with more real life understanding about how your own body, how your own physiology, how your own mind works when you're looking at pushing through those thresholds and you're looking at pushing through the breakthroughs. And so that was a great year of doing that. Thursdays, oddly enough, today's the Thursday, I was always my rowing days. And so I'd literally work out, because I work out 6 days a week, I would always work up to, quote unquote, that peak performance on the Thursdays of pushing myself on the rowing machine. And again, it took me a year to get there, which means I had a whole lot of times of 14,000 some odd meters, 14,000 some odd meters, 14,000 some odd meters. Sometimes I got really close. 14,925 meters. Man, missed it by 75 meters. So close. Let's come back next Thursday. Oh man, 14,875. Now I'm 125 away. Okay, let's get back on it. Analyze. But it was always the motivation, because that's what we're talking about today. It was always the motivation. And it was through the motivation that pushed my abilities, that pushed my skill set, that pushed my effort, and that pushed my attitude to a higher level. Or in some cases, pulled my abilities, pulled my skills, pulled my attitude, and pulled my effort to a higher level to where I finally reached that goal. And so this is the, I'll say, dynamic that you want to be going back and forth on from my supercar, my abilities, my skills, my effort, my attitude, motivation, the rocket fuel that goes in, that powers the car. And like we talked about here, here's the performance equation that we've talked about before. Okay. And so your performance is your talents times your habits times the opportunity you put in front of yourself. You know, your talents, your skills to hike a mountain. If we're talking in this situation about myself, the effort and attitude, the habits that I bring to climb that mountain, the opportunity, what's the mountain, what time of day, what the weather's like, do I have the right equipment? Do I have, all of that goes into the opportunity piece. And so all of that drives my performance. Okay. And that builds the supercar. Ultimately, though, what makes the supercar go? That's the quality of the fuel that you put into it. And that, my friends, is your motivation. Let me end the slide here. We'll stop sharing. We'll go back to here. And so that's really motivation, okay? Develop your motivational strategy. move from being externally motivated to internally motivated. Really look at your push versus your pull strategies and build a strategy, a motivational strategy for yourself that focuses 10% on that push, 90% on that pull. Have a great day.